Here. It is good to be here. I trust you all had a good week, a good day. I love getting together on Good Friday. It's just something about it that's special. So we're going to simply dive right into it, the order of the service. So I'll have a fairly short sermon, and then we'll go into share time, and then we will come back and have communion here. So I'm going to be doing a lot of scripture reading today that you can follow along if you want to. I will use a lot of the crucifixion passage in Matthew, beginning in Matthew 21 through chapters 27. But there'll be some up on the screen, but feel free to follow along as you want to. But I won't do a lot of commentary tonight. So what we'll simply do here is we will start with this here. So this is simply, this last week was Passion Week, and it begins here with Jesus. Last Sunday was Palm Sunday, the triumphal entry, and the whole idea here is to think of so many people that Jesus interacted. The title of the message is, What Will You Do with Jesus? Each one of us interacts with Jesus in some way. During this last week of his life, during the last 24 hours of his life especially, he interacted with people in a very meaningful way. Some of them responded very differently. Each of us have an encounter with Jesus, and we're going to need to connect with him in some way, and how will we respond is the question tonight. So, Jesus enters the temple. We know what happens down the Mount of Olives there on a donkey. He goes up to he goes into Jerusalem, and he enters. It says actually that he went into the temple, and Mark 11:11 says he entered after the triumphal entry. He goes into the temple. It says he looked around at everything, and it was late, so he went back to Bethany. So he went back out to Bethany, which was just up on that's where Lazarus and them were. So they went up to there for the night, and then that's also where Mary, the brother of Lazarus, anoints his feet with ointment. Not to be confused with the time that there was a lady that anointed his head, but this was Mary anointed his feet. That was the beginning there. Sunday, we go into Monday. Jesus goes back into Jerusalem on his way down the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives is up on a mountain here. It's not really high. We would call it a big hill, smaller than the schoolhouse hill over here in Baltic. So it's kind of like that hill comes down into town, and there's a little valley there, the Kidron Valley, the little bit of a creek that runs through it, and then on the other side is Mount Zion, where the temple is. So Jesus comes down the mountain, goes up into the temple, and that's when he throws out the money changers. He cleanses the temple, and on the way it says that he's hungry, and he sees a fig tree that has lots of leaves, and he wants some figs. He gets up to it, there's none there, and he curses the tree. Okay? And he just curses it, and he keeps going. And you're like, why in the world would Jesus curse a tree? We know that he doesn't do anything just because, okay? We'll get back to it. We come back to that story a little bit later. But I'm going to read the passage here where he cleanses the temple, and this is again in Mark 11. It says, And when they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple, he overturned the tables of money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And as he was teaching them and saying to them, It is written, My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you have made it a den of robbers. And the chief priests and the scribes heard it and were seeking a way to destroy him, for they feared him, because all the crowd was astonished at his teaching. And when evening came, they went out of the city. It also says that this is a day that on top of Mount Olives, the Mount of Olives, he's looking down over Jerusalem, and he weeps for the city. Matthew talks about him wanting to, he weeps for her as a hen gathers her chickens around him. So he's weeping for the city. This is a very emotional time. Jesus, throughout his ministry, 3 years of ministry, he's very cautious not to put himself out there. He's very cautious in how he speaks. When he heals someone, he often says, don't tell anyone or don't say anything. This is different. This is last week. He knows his time is near. He is all out. He is confronting. He is interacting. He's talking. And it's the style of his life or his ministry is very different now than it was up to now. He weeps over the city there in Luke 19:41-44, also in Matthew. Tuesday, Jesus goes back to the temple, and this is a big day for him. Jesus teaches openly in the temple, and then on the way back, looks at the fig tree. It is now dead. It's withered away, and he has an object lesson. He talks to the disciples about faith. It's a very fascinating little snippet there if you ever want to look at it. But then that's when they go to the temple. They're watching them do their alms, and he watches the widow throw in the 2 mites. It's that discussion. He also talks, God audibly glorifies Jesus. Jesus asked God to glorify him, and some people said that it thundered, but people around him said, no, that was a voice saying. It's God audibly glorified Jesus right in the temple as he was teaching and preaching. And remember, this is Passover week. This is several. It's not to be exaggerated to say that there's 100,000 people in Jerusalem during this week. It is full. It is loud. It is sweaty. It is smelly. They don't have cars with gas fumes, but they have animals with the same kind of fumes. This is messy, and so there's all sorts of stuff going on here. So he teaches openly in the city. He teaches about the desolation of abomination. This is where he talks about the parable of the 2 sons, the one that did what he was said he would, the one that didn't. The parable of the tenants in the vineyard. He talks about the parable of the 10 virgins here, the parable of the talents. This is all this day on Tuesday. It's a long day. This is his last major teaching that he does before he's killed. Wednesday, he goes back out to Bethany, and he doesn't come back. He stays in Bethany, doesn't go back into the city at all. He goes into the house of Simon the leper, and it says that a woman came in and she broke a box of ointment and anointed his head. That irritated Judas. It's the second time this has happened in about a week, and he's all about the money, and he's like, okay, I need to find something. So he starts bargaining with the Sanhedrin to betray Jesus. Remember, the Sanhedrin is made up of several different groups of people. The Sanhedrin is made up of the Pharisees. And the Pharisees, most of the Pharisees are from Galilee. They are the teachers of the law. They are the ones that, for the most part, are good people. They're very traditional, but they are good people. The Sanhedrin's also made up of scribes. Scribes are the ones that teach the law, and they're like they're the ones that actually scribe the law. They're like the copy of the law. So they're the ones that look at the Bible as an incredible tight rule book. No fudge here at all. Then there's also the Sadducees and the Herodians. The Sadducees and the Herodians are not religious people at all. But this is Jerusalem, this is Israel, and if they want to be in power, they have to be religious. It's kind of like the politicians that want to make sure they change their stance on abortion, whatever they know will keep them in power. That's exactly what's going on here. And so they're waffling here, and they know that they have to be responsible to the Romans that are keeping them in power, and also the people that won't rise up. And so this is a big deal. These guys are all working together. The Pharisees and the Sadducees, they don't like each other, okay? But they're united in their opposition to Jesus because they know that he will throw them out of power. Okay? Judas Iscariot, it says here in Mark 14, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him. And it says that from then on, he looked for an opportunity. Thursday comes, Jesus sends Peter and John in to get the Passover ready, and I'm going to read this passage in Mark 14. This is the pretty long passage here, and you can follow along if you want to. Mark 14, verse 12. This is when they got the Last Supper ready. Remember, this is the last time that Jesus observed the Passover. This is also the first time that he instituted the Lord's Supper. We're not doing Passover tonight. We're doing communion. It's the Lord's Supper. It's the same. It has connection to it, but it is the Lord's Supper because we're in the New Testament here. I'm going to just simply read it here. This is Jesus interacting with his disciples. So, Matthew 14, 12 to 25. And on the first day of unleavened bread, when they sacrificed the Passover lamb, his disciples said to him, "Where will you have us go prepare to eat the Passover?" And he sent 2 of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. And wherever he enters, say to the master of the house, 'The teacher says, where is my guest room that I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' And he will show you a large upper room. furnished and ready there. Prepare for us." And the disciples set out and went to the city and found it just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. And when it was evening, he came with the 12, and they were reclining at the table and eating. Jesus said, "Truly I say to you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." They began to be sorrowful and to say to him one after another, "Is it I?" He said to them, "It is one of the 12, one who dippeth bread into the dish with me. For the Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born." Then he goes on in verse 22, "And when they were eating, he took bread, and after a blessing, he brake it, gave it to them, and said, 'Take, this is my body.' And he took a cup. When he had given thanks, he gave to them, and they all drank of it. And he said to them, 'This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly I say to you, I will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it anew in the kingdom of God.'" This is the first time that he did the Last Supper. Right after this, then, is when it says that they sang an hymn, and they went up to Mount Olives, and from there down to the Garden of Gethsemane. So what we're going to do is just do a little bit of a drive-by really quickly here of the next events that happened. Jesus was tried 6 times, and so we're going to be looking at some of those places. 5 times. And so what we'll do here is this is simply a map of Jerusalem at the time of Jesus. It's very similar than it is now. It's a little different. We're going to look at some different pieces. And if you see the one, there's some numbers on there. You can see them a little bit up here. But if you look at one there, Jesus starts out in the upper room. And from the upper room, he goes down. And when I drew these, I didn't go through the gates. So you're going to see some scribbles through there. But imagine that there were gates there, all right? So he goes to the Garden of Gethsemane, and it says that he actually, as he go down there, I'll read this a little bit later, but think of what I want you to do as we talk the next 15 minutes. I want you to think of the people that Jesus interacts with. Jesus interacts with Peter. Peter has a response. He interacts with Judas, a very different response. They both betray him, but a different response. He interacts with Pilate. He interacts with Pilate's wife. Maybe not directly, but she had to do something with this man. He interacts with King Herod. He interacts with the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees, and even the Roman soldier that was just doing his job. So he goes to Mount of Olives, and from them, just down on the bottom of the hill to Garden of Gethsemane. After he was arrested, what we'll do is we'll do an overview, then we'll go back and dive into each part a little bit deeper. After the Garden of Gethsemane, they go back. He gets arrested. They take him back. Right beside the upper room is called the high priest's house. It's the house of Annas, the high priest. Annas was the father-in-law to the current high priest during that time, which was Caiaphas. Caiaphas and Annas were working together there. He had a very short, it was right about midnight, and so they're not allowed to try him, but they do a very short trial in the middle of the night, and he then is kept in chains in a dungeon down in the basement until the next morning. This is also where Peter betrays him, and we'll dive into that a little bit deeper later. From there, Jesus is taken before the Jewish council. As soon as dawn breaks, he goes up to the temple, which is just up and over through the gate into the temple. This is where the main trial in front of the Jewish leaders were taken. Now, he was tried for 2 things. He was tried for blasphemy in front of the Jews, okay? He was tried for something very different in front of Pilate. Pilate didn't care if he blasphemed the law. That wasn't a big deal to him. Pilate cared that he protected the king, so they accused him of treason. And so he was actually killed for treason, but the Jews actually accused him of blasphemy, saying that he was the Son of God. And remember a couple weeks ago, this is exactly why he was killed, because he claimed to be the Son of God. It's a big deal. He claimed to be the Son of God. For that, he was killed. He goes in the temple with all its, this is Herod's temple. It was big. It was bigger than Solomon's temple. It was very, very nice. And so this was a big deal early in the morning, right at dawn. They then accuse him. They find him guilty. From there, they just take him up around the temple over to Pilate. Pilate is the governor in the town there, and Pilate, of course, gets woken up early in the morning, has to do a trial at 7 o'clock in the morning. Pilate usually just essentially earmarks what they tell him to do. This time is different. Pilate, they actually, at the beginning of Passover, they don't want to be unclean, so they can't go into the judgment hall with Jesus. They send him in, but Pilate comes out to them. It's this very interesting dialogue where Pilate talks to Jesus, comes out, talks to them, goes back and forth, because they're in the middle of trying to kill someone, they're still trying to keep their law. I mean, it's really weird. All right, Pilate is a little confused, doesn't know what to do with him. He hears that he's a Galilean. He says, okay, I'm going to send him to Herod. I actually don't want to be in charge of him. I want to send him to Herod, let Herod kill him, or let Herod sentence him. He sends him over to Herod through the back of the temple, around the back of the temple, over to Herod's palace. Herod is a bit of a playboy. Herod has several wives. He is incredibly scared of people. This is Herod the Great's son, Herod Antipas. Herod is a man that, remember, he's also the man that killed John the Baptist, had his head cut off. It was just a very weird. This is when Jesus starts to get beat up. Here it says that they start beating him, they start mocking him. It says that they spit on him and would blindfold him and ask him who hit him. So this is where this actually physical beating started to take place. He doesn't answer Herod. Herod wants signs and wonders. He wants Jesus to do something. Jesus sends him back to Pilate, and Pilate doesn't know what to do. So Pilate's wife pleads with him not to accuse him. He offers to release a prisoner, thinks this will take care of it. They ask for Jesus to be crucified and Barnabas to be released. The Jewish leaders demand Barabbas, and then Pilate sentenced Jesus to death. And here's where it gets really interesting, how the fact that Pilate actually sentenced Jesus to death for something that he wasn't convinced that Jesus would guilty of, but he did it in order to keep the peace. Okay, very innocent man. So what we're going to do here is from there, Jesus is led out to Golgotha, and there he's crucified. And so we're going to do a 15-minute interaction with a few of these places here. So the first stop is Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. This is a beautiful depiction. The Garden of Gethsemane, it looks exactly like that, except the temple looks very different now. Instead of the temple up there, is now the Dome of the Rock. The temple wall is there, except that little square thing up there that juts up at the top, that is now the Dome of the Rock, which is a Muslim mosque. But the garden looks very much the same. It looked very different 2,000 years ago when in the middle of the night Jesus was praying. His disciples were sleeping, and this mob from the temple comes down to arrest him in the middle of the night. Jesus fought his biggest battle right here. It's because here he is on his knees. It said that he wept drops of blood. And he knew that what would happen here. He knew that God had to forsake him here. I'm going to read here in Matthew 26. And when they had sung an hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus said to them, "You will all fall away because of me this night. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee." Peter answered him, "Though they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away." Jesus said to him, "Truly I say to you, this very night, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, "Even if I must die with you, I will not deny you." And all the disciples said the same. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit ye here while I go over and pray." And then it goes on and talks about how he prayed and how he was fighting with essentially with his own will. And he says, "My soul is sorrowful even to death. Remain here and watch with me." And going a little farther, he fell on his face and he prayed, saying, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." And he came to his disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "So could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that ye may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." And it says for the second and the third time, then he finally said, "Sleep, because my time has come." And it says, and while he was yet speaking, Judas, one of the 12, came, and with him a great crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, the one I will kiss is a man, seize him. And he came up to Jesus at once and said, greetings, Rabbi. And he kissed him. Jesus said to him, friend, do what you came to do. And they came up and laid hands on him and seized him. And behold, one of those who was with Jesus stretched out his hand, drew his sword, and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. We know this was Peter, and the servant's name was Malchus. And then Jesus actually, this is incredible here, Jesus said to him, put your sword back in its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you not think that I can appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me 12 legions of angels? But how then should the scripture be fulfilled, that it must be so? And then Jesus, you know that he is taken. And then Jesus, from there, he goes up to the house of Caiaphas. This is a picture of the dungeons. When we were there a couple years ago, I took these pictures. It's an incredible feeling. They think that this is probably the very dungeons that Jesus spent the hours between, when he got up there, maybe between 1 o'clock and 6 o'clock that next morning. He stayed there probably alone and everybody else outside around him. Right outside of this is a statue there, because this is actually where Peter betrayed Jesus. We know that Jesus told him that he would betray him, and just simply going to, well, I won't read this simply because we'll run out of time here. But Peter, we know that Peter said, "He will. I will follow you wherever you want to go." And outside here, Peter was approached by the servants, and they said, "No, I don't even know the man." And then he actually curses and swears and said that I don't know him. It says, but as Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came, and seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, "You were also with the Nazarene Jesus." But he denied it, saying, "I neither know nor understand what you mean." And he went out into the gateway. And the rooster crowed, and the servant girl saw him and began to say again to the bystanders, "This man is one of them." But again he denied it. And after a little while the bystanders again said to Jesus, "Certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean." But he began to evoke a curse on himself and to swear, "I do not know this man of whom you speak." And immediately the rooster crowed a second time. And Peter remembered how Jesus said to him, "Before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." And I think in Luke it says that Jesus actually looked on Peter right now and he saw him, very possibly when Peter was taken from here over to the Sanhedrin. It is dawn. It is now legal for them to have a trial. This sham trial that lasted at midnight wasn't legal, but they did it anyway. Now they take him into the temple. Jesus is tried before the Jewish council at dawn. I'm going to read here several passages here. One is this, what I'm going to read here is in Luke 22, 66 to 71. When the day came, the assembly of the elders and people gathered together, both chief priests and scribes, and they led him away at their council, and they said, "If you are the Christ, tell us." And he said to them, "If I tell you, you will not believe, and if I ask you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated on the right hand of the power of God." And they said, "Are you the Son of God?" And he said to them, "You say that I am." And they said, "What further testimony do we need? We have heard it from our own lips." And so here's where they accused Jesus in front of the Jewish council. And here again, Jesus was, I'm sure they treated him roughly, but he wasn't beat up at all physically. This is beginning to change. Jesus is led then from there to Pilate to be tried for treason, because although they knew that he was blasphemed, that wouldn't have worked. And so in Luke 23, 1-5, it says, "And the whole company of them arose and brought him before Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, 'We found this man misleading our nation, forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king.' And Pilate asked him, 'Are you king of the Jews?' And he answered them, 'You have said so.' Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, 'I find no guilt in this man.' But they were urgent, saying, 'He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, and from Galilee even to this place.'" John 18, 33 to 38. So Pilate enters his headquarters again, called to Jesus and said to him, "Are you a king of the Jews?" And then Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord, or do others say this about me?" Pilate answers, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus then answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would be fighting, that I may not have been delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from this world." Then Pilate said to them, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" Pilate doesn't know what to do. He knows there's something different about this man, but he's unwilling to make a change. He says, "What is truth?" All of a sudden, he then hears that Jesus is a Galilean, and says that when Pilate hears that he's a Galilean, in Luke 23, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. And when he heard that he belonged to Herod's, here he goes, to Herod's jurisdiction, he sends him over to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at the time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had long desired to seek him, because he had heard about him, and he was hoping to see some sign done to him. Herod's response, he wanted signs and wonders. He wanted Jesus to do something for him. He wanted to be, So he questioned him at some length, but he made no answer. The chief priests and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing him. And then Herod and his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him. They arrayed him in splendid clothing and sent him back to Pilate. And it says that Herod and Pilate became friends with each other on that very day. For before this, they had been at enmity with one another. Here then, Pilate gets tired of him. He sends him back. Herod gets tired of him. He's not doing anything. He sends him back to Pilate. And this all took place in several hours. Jesus was put on the cross at 9 o'clock. And so from about 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock, there's just a lot going on here. He goes back to Pilate a second time, and here then is where they put the crown of thorns on him. They put a scarlet robe on him, ripped that off of him after a while, and put a purple robe on him because they're mocking him because he calls himself a king. So I'm going to read here in Luke 23. Actually, I'm not going to. We're simply running out of time here. But here's the piece here. He simply sees what Jesus is doing, and he's not sure what to do with him. He says, "I'm going to release him to you." And they say, "No, don't. Crucify him." And here's where they say, "We have no king but Caesar." That will come back to haunt them. But for now, Pilate then, he sees he gains nothing, and then so he took water, washed his hands with water, says, I'm innocent from the blood of this man, and he turned him over to be scourged. Now, when he scourged him, when Jesus is now a condemned man, and he is on his way to death, I'm simply going to read the resurrection, the crucifixion story here, and I put together, it's several gospels all jumbled together. I'm going to read it from the screen here so that we're all on the same page. Here. Then Pilate took Jesus and flogged him, and the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and arrayed him in a purple robe. They came up to him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" and struck him with their hands. Pilate went out again and said to them, "See, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find him no guilt in him." So Jesus came out wearing a crown of thorns and a purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." When the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourself and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to that law, he ought to die because he has made himself the Son of God." When Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. He entered his headquarters again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "You will not speak to me? Do you not know that I have the authority to release you and the authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin." From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Anyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement, that is in Aramaic Gabbatha. Now it is a day of preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. He said to the Jews, "Behold your king." They cried out, "Away with him, away with him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So he delivered him over to them to be crucified. So they took Jesus, and he went out bearing his own cross. And as they went out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. They compelled this man to carry his cross. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on his right and the other on his left. And Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." One of the criminals who was hanged railed on him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward for our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." And he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he said to him, "Truly, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." Pilate also wrote an inscription and put it on the cross that read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read the inscription, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Aramaic, in Latin, and in Greek. So the chief priests of the Jews said to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but rather this man said, 'I am the King of the Jews.'" Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." So also the chief priests with the scribes and elders mocked him, saying, "He saved himself. He saved others. He cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him, if he desires him. For he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" When the soldiers had crucified Jesus, they took his garments and divided them into 4 parts, 1 part for each soldier, also his tunic. But the tunic was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. And they said to him, "Let us not tear it, but cast lots for it to see whose it shall be." This was to fulfill the scripture which said, "They divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots." So the soldiers did these things, but standing by the cross of Jesus was Mary and his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." And he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour the disciple took her into his own home. Now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani?" That is to say, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some of the bystanders, hearing it, said, "This man is calling Elijah." And one of them at once ran and took a sponge and filled it with sour wine and put it on a reed and gave it to him to drink. But the others said, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come and save him." And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tomb after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. And when the centurion and those who were with him kept watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and what had taken place, they were filled with awe and said, "Truly, this was the Son of God." Since it was the day of preparation, so that the bodies would not remain on the cross for the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day, the Jews asked Pilate that their legs may be broken, that they may be taken away. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and the other who had been crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and all at once there came out blood and water. He who saw it has borne witness. His testimony is true, and he knows that he is telling the truth, that you may also believe. For these things took place, that the scripture might be fulfilled. Not one of his bones will be broken. And another scripture says, they will look on him whom they have pierced. After these things, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he may take away the body of Jesus. And Pilate gave him permission. So he came and took away his body. Nicodemus also, who had earlier come to Jesus by night, came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds weight. And they took the body of Jesus and bound it in linen cloth with the spices, as is the burial custom of the Jews. And on the place where he was crucified there was a garden, and in that garden a new tomb for which no one had yet been laid. But so because of the Jewish day of preparation, since the tomb was close at hand, they laid Jesus there. When the going got hard, Peter betrayed him. Judas wanted Jesus as long as he could, but when he could see an exit ramp, he took money instead. Pilate met Jesus, but he was worried about protecting his influence with the king. Herod wanted Jesus to be a magician for him, to do some sign. He was looking for signs and wonders. The Pharisees were worried that Jesus would ruin their traditions and lead people away. The scribes were afraid that Jesus would violate the law and undo the effort they put into keeping their religion pure. The Sadducees and the high priest, they met Jesus too, but they worried that he would upset the power balance that they'd worked so long and hard to perfect. Simon the Cyrene met Jesus too. We don't know exactly what happened there, but later in the epistles we heard that there was a Simon of Cyrene that was a believer. I can well imagine that as he carried that cross and as he walked with Jesus, helping him carry his cross, he looked into the eyes of Jesus and he saw something there, and it changed his life. He couldn't help but be changed. The Roman soldier was just doing his job. He didn't want to mess with it, just doing my job. But he knew that there was something different. Jesus is standing in Pilate's hall, friendless, forsaken, betrayed by all. Hearken, what meaneth the sudden call? What will you do with Jesus? What will you do with Jesus? Neutral you cannot be. Someday your heart will be asking, what will he do with me? Jesus is standing on trial still. You can be false to him if you will. You can be faithful through good or ill. What will you do with Jesus? Will you evade him as Pilate tried? Or will you choose him, whate'er betide? Will you, like Peter, your Lord deny? Or will you scorn from his foes to fly? Daring for Jesus to live and die, what will you do with Jesus? Jesus, I give you my heart today. Jesus, I'll follow you all the way. Gladly obeying you will I say, this I will do with Jesus. There's a song that goes like that. I think we're going to skip it for today. I popped it in here, but I think we're going to skip it simply for that. We're going to move on to communion. Jesus said that we do this in remembrance. So I think it's appropriate that there's a certain uneasiness on Friday before Easter that we remember what Jesus did for us. There's a sense of mourning and sadness until Sunday morning. What we're going to do now is we're going to divide up in our groups, and we'll divide up. I want anyone that is a baptized visitor or a member just share in the groups, and then we'll go from there. So what we'll do is just share in your group, come back, and then we'll have communion, and then we'll follow up. So Kenny and Amy, your group is upstairs in the teaching room. Just go upstairs into the old, what we used to call the screen room. And what I'll do is I'll just call you out. So it's the old screen room, if you remember where that is, Kenny. Okay, so if you guys just go, as I call you out goes, then not everybody goes at one time. So anyone that is in Kenny and Amy's group, just head on up there. Mark and Deborah's group is in the back of the fellowship hall. Just go way in the back, Mark. Just way in the back there by the table. Josh and Missy's, you guys are upstairs in the new room, just up the steps and to the left. Okay? And then Jesse and Andrea, your group is in the kitchen. if there's anyone here that's not in a group or hasn't been assigned one yet, and then just meet with the group up front here with Dean and Ada. Steve and Charlene's group, your group is in the back in the fellowship hall, just anywhere in the back there on the left side. And then Terry and Jeanette, you guys are in the entrance. Pat and Annie, you guys are up front. And I had down that I will lead that because I didn't know Pat and Annie were going to be here, but I'll let you take care of it. And then Dean and Ada, you guys is right in the sanctuary, right in the back here.